Hello there, my name is Sarah and I'm reading from Secret City by Jan Andrew Henderson. This is part 2 of chapter 13, The Monster. Charlie searched around the little vault where the council workers kept their supplies until he found a small pulley that he had noticed on his first visit. He put it in his pocket, took a length of nylon rope from a shelf and wound it around his waist. Then he moved the debris covering the tunnel entrance, slid inside and began crawling back towards the lower levels of the underground city. He knew he could easily find Shadow Jack Henry's vault again. All he had to do was follow the chalk marks that he'd made on the wall less than a week ago. Less than a week ago? He just couldn't believe it. Just 7 days ago, he was an ordinary boy living an ordinary life, and now he was marching down a hidden tunnel to do battle with an ancient monster. He wasn't the same boy anymore. The old Charlie wouldn't even have stood up to the school bully. Lily was sure that magic would be disastrous to men, and reluctantly, he was forced to agree with her. This was not some petty classroom squabble, but a noble and valiant quest that might even save his whole race. He still wasn't sure it was worth fighting a monster for, though. When he reached Shadow Jack's vault, the boy stood outside the doorway for several minutes until his breathing was under control and his heart had stopped pounding like a jackhammer. Once he was inside the vault, he would have to work quickly and calmly if he was to have any chance of succeeding, or staying alive for that matter. Hesitation is an acrobat's worst enemy, he said to himself, and stepped into the chamber. The hard hat's beam lit up the wooden triangle and iron hook at the base of the vault wall, the old apparatus that Shadow Jack Henry once used to draw water for his forge. Charlie dragged it to within a few feet of the wall, positioning the apparatus between the blocked-up hole and the vault doorway. He unwound the rope from around his waist, threaded it through the detachable metal pulley that he took from his pocket, and fastened the pulley to the wooden triangle. Then he took the end of the rope that had been threaded through the pulley and tied it to the ancient hook. The metal was old and rusty, but still solid enough for its purpose. The rope and pulley system now formed the basis for a crude winch, and he slid the hook under the rim of the metal cylinder that blocked the well. He stepped back, wound the rest of the rope back around his waist, and then turned and began walking towards the vault exit. The rope tightened. Charlie gritted his teeth and kept going. The pulley jiggled, and there was a grinding sound from the metal dish. The boy pulled harder, though each tug tightened the rope around his waist, forcing the air from his lungs. The metal dish groaned again, and the rim slid up a few inches. Charlie grunted, trying to find a proper foothold, throwing himself against the rope, fighting for air, sweat prickling his body. His feet slipped with each step, so that he seemed to be walking on the spot, but he bent his head and he strained even more. The dish rose a foot out of the well. "Ah!" Charlie roared, staggering forwards, fists clenched, veins standing out in his forehead. "Come on, you rotten, stupid dish, come on!" With a horrendous screech, the metal container lurched out of the hole in the ground and landed with a crash, demolishing the wooden frame. Charlie collapsed, face down, his outstretched hands scraping along the floor of the vault, lacerating the skin on his palms. In an instant, he was back on his feet and unwinding the rope. He glanced over his shoulder. The metal dish lay on its side, and right behind it, the boy could see a gaping black hole in the vault floor. The well was open. The boy listened. At first, the only thing that he could hear was his own ragged breathing, but then he caught a noise, faint and far away, a noise that sounded like drumming. Mordred was coming. Charlie darted out to the vault, sped back through the tunnels. His arms and legs were pumping with all their might, but he concentrated on keeping his neck rigid and the beam of light steadily pointing downwards. If he stumbled and fell on the uneven floor, he would lose precious seconds, and that might make the difference between life and death. A blood-curdling roar echoed through the corridors behind him, and with a cry of fear, Charlie sprinted even faster. Reaching the bottom of the steps, he scrabbled up, slipping on the wet stone, using his hands to propel himself forwards. But he was going too fast to judge distance properly. As he launched himself through the little hole at the top, his helmet cracked on the jagged brickwork, and the light smashed, plunging him into utter darkness. Charlie's bout of terrified swearing was drowned out by another monstrous bellow, much closer than the last. The boy scrambled to his feet, began stumbling along the corridor, one arm scraping along the wall, the other waving blindly in front. The best he could now manage was a hesitant shuffle, and he knew that Mordred would catch him long before he could reach the big top. He didn't even know how to get back now, for he couldn't even see where the tunnels forked, never mind the chalk numbers telling him which passage to take. The trembling boy stopped, taking deep breaths, trying desperately to calm down. Wiping tears from his eyes, he peered into the blackness in a vain attempt to see something, anything, that might give him a clue to where the next turn-off lay. And there it was, a glowing pinpoint of light, punching a tiny hole in the darkness. Letting go of the wall, the boy staggered towards the glow, arms flailing out in front of him, his stumbling run gathering momentum until it ended in a headlong dive. His lungs emptied with a painful whoosh as he landed heavily on the rough floor, but his outstretched fingers closed round a little sparkling object. It was a juggling ball, and next to it was a hand-held torch. "Thank you, Lily," the boy breathed, switching on the light. The beam lit up a numbered fork to his left. It's only 2 feet away. There was another howl from Mordred, this time right behind Charlie. Then the boy was off again, racing up the passages, hurtling himself round dark corners and crawling along the last narrow tunnel like a jet-propelled mole. He burst into the maintenance vault, tearing the construction helmet from his head and flinging it across the room. Already he could hear a horrific rending of stone as something much larger and 1,000 times stronger than he was forced itself into the other end of the tunnel. Then Charlie was in the big top, running for the exit, grasping at Excalibur as he went past. The sword slid from the stone as easily as it had gone in, and seconds later the boy was standing with his back to the theatre door, the weapon held defensively in front of his face. The door that led to the workman's vault flew off its hinges in an explosion of shattered wood, and Mordred stepped into the big top. Oh my God. Charlie's face turned chalk white as he saw his opponent for the first time. Mordred was the height of a reasonably tall man, but there, any resemblance with humanity stopped. He had heavily muscled arms that reached almost to his knees, and his spade-like hands ended in a rash of vicious yellow talons. The creature's legs were shorter and thick. There were hooves where his feet should have been, and his body was maggot white, hairless and laced with thick blue veins. But it was his face that shocked Charlie most. Mordred's angular head was bald, and his jaw jutted forward like a mechanical scoop lined with dozens of little piranha-like teeth. His ears were disproportionately large, set flat against the small scalp, but the rest of his features were almost non-existent. His nose was no more than a hole in the front of his face, and his eyes had retreated far into his skull, 2 glowing points of hatred burnt deep within his waxy flesh. The creature took a few lurching steps towards the boy, raising its talons as it approached. Charlie lifted his sword over his head and pointed it towards the beast. Like he had seen the ninjas do in kung fu movies, he hoped it looked impressive. "You're not getting past me, and I don't care how big you are." He tried to sound bold and manly, but the words came out in a series of trembling squeaks. "You've never heard of David and Goliath?" The monster stopped, A strange gurgling sound rose from somewhere inside its chest, and the jutting mouth split into a hideous upturned slash. Charlie realised with a growing horror that the creature was laughing. Then things got worse. "Brave boy," the troll gurgled. "Brave, even if you do hold the great sword." Mordred's speech was thick and vibrant, buzzing like a swarm of feasting flies, and despite his horror, Charlie was surprised to notice that the creature had a Scottish accent. The boy gripped the sword handle tighter. It occurred to him that Mordred hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 centuries. He might be inclined to chat for a while before tearing the boy limb from limb. Mordred looked around the big top with what Charlie presumed was a satisfied grin. "I cannot pass you while you have the weapon, as you surely know," he hissed, "but I do not need the door to escape. The poor walls of this dwelling are not like the thick stone of the prison where I suffered so long." He headed for the side of the big top, ignoring the boy. "I shall tear my way out with my bare hands." The boy kept quiet, Excalibur tight in his trembling fist. Mordred raised a taloned claw. Charlie held his breath. The creature stopped, sniffing suspiciously at the air around the wall. He turned his white mottled head and stared malevolently at the boy. The hair rose on the back of Charlie's neck. "Clever. So clever," the troll growled. "It's daylight outside, is it not? You tried to fool Mordred, clever little boy." He cantered back to the centre of the theatre, clicking his talons together as if considering his situation. "Clever little boy," he muttered again, "but Mordred can wait for night to fall. After all, I have waited for 16 centuries to be free. Can you imagine that, little boy?" Charlie shook his head. "No, Mordred can hardly imagine it himself, nor does he want to." The troll hunkered down in the middle of the big top. "After such a time, I can wait a few more hours." He laughed his bitter, gurgling laugh again. "I'll fight you," Charlie said in a tiny voice. His legs were trembling so badly he could hardly stand, and he felt sick and dizzy with fear. "Like you said, I have the sword." "Agalhadrian is behind this," the creature whispered, tapping its head with a claw. "You would not do this on your own." It clicked its talons together again and rose to its feet. "Stalemate," it hissed. "I cannot defeat you, that is true, but you cannot catch me. At nightfall, Mordred shall simply tear his way through these puny walls to freedom. You cannot guard every exit." He turned and began to plod towards the back of the theatre. "I don't intend to," said Charlie quietly, looking up. 6 feet above his head, the safety net for the high wire act stretched from one side of the big top to the other. He bent his trembling knees, tensing all the muscles in his body, and leapt into the air. Slashing as high as the sword could reach, Excalibur's blade swept through the steel ropes, fastening the net to the wall as if they were thread. With a loud twang, one side of the mesh swept down, draping itself over Mordred. Charlie charged forward with a yell as the creature spun round, snarling. Through the safety net though it was made of wire and coated with toughened rubber, the creature's talons sliced through the mesh as easily as Excalibur had. Mordred's arm shot through the hole torn in the fabric and grasped one of the metal posts that roped off the performance arena. He plucked it from the theatre floor as if it were a weed, and secured bolts popped out of the concrete like bullets, and flung the spike at the boy. Charlie dived as the post rocketed towards him, hunching his shoulders, tucking in his head the way he'd seen his parents do 100 times before. The metal bar whizzed past, inches over his head, and buried itself in the theatre wall. Charlie rolled out of the dive in time to see Mordred reaching for another post. With a grunt, he threw Excalibur straight at the creature. Mordred roared in defiance and launched himself sideways, rolling as effectively as Charlie had done, though the movement tangled him even more in the safety net. Excalibur sliced harmlessly past and clattered away at the back of the theatre, stopping next to the door that led back to the tunnels. Now Mordred was between Charlie and his only weapon. "The boy has lost the great sword," he cackled, slicing at the net again. "The boy is lost." But instead of turning back, Charlie headed straight for Mordred, the creature slashing wildly at the net, trying to free its arms properly, and its jagged rows of teeth slavered as it bit down on the wire strands. With every atom of his strength, Charlie leapt again, arms outstretched like a soaring bird, up over Mordred's head. The monster thrust one tangled arm skywards, claws glinting, but Charlie tucked his head down again and flicked his legs over his back. With a grace and skill that would have delighted his parents, he twisted in the air, arching over Mordred's outstretched arm, somersaulting perfectly and landing on his feet on the other side of the monster. Momentum kept him going, and he staggered to the back of the theatre, grabbing Excalibur from the floor, jumping, and slashed again the other side of the safety net, pinging it away from the wall and enveloping the creature once more. With a ferocious howl, Mordred tore into the new mesh folds with teeth and claws. Charlie reached down to a prop table, half hidden in the shadows, and picked up a small black box. He pointed it to the big top roof. "Welcome to the 21st century, he said, the tremble gone from his voice, and pressed a green button. With an electronic whir, the two halves of the theatre roof began to separate. Mordred's head shot up, and he gave a wail as a line of sunlight appeared on the theatre floor. He struggled out of the net and lumbered towards the back of the theatre, but now Charlie and Excalibur stood between him and the only way back into the tunnels. Behind the creature, a widening band of light danced and sparkled on the chrome and plastic of the theatre fittings. The monster looked at Charlie, clasping its clawed hands together as if in prayer. Tiny eyes, filled now with sadness and fear, burnt into the boy, and Charlie felt a sharp pain in his chest. Just for a second, he'd seen something terribly human in that stare. "Clever little boy," Mordred whispered softly as the sunlight reached him. Charlie's eyes widened in horror. Watching the light hit Mordred was like watching some huge deformed snowman caught in an inferno. The troll dissolved in front of his eyes, gobbets of flesh sliding from his body and hissing and bubbling like fat melting in a pan. Turning his head upwards, stretching out his mighty arms, Mordred let out one last agonizing roar. "Morgana!" The sound echoed round and round the big top, but Mordred was gone, leaving nothing but a pool of rancid flesh on the theatre floor. Charlie dropped Excalibur, his chest heaving. "Well, Dad was right," he said, as his whole body began to shake. "This trip has certainly brought me out of my shell." He sank to his knees and he began to cry. Wow. Okay, teeth clean, wash hands, off to bed. Big cuddle, and I'll speak to you tomorrow for the final chapter, The Thin Place.